Okay. This is October the 26th, 2007 in Bethesda, Maryland. Have been here for a visit with Scott, Tammy, and little Miss Corinne. Last night,
Corinne is 5 years old.
yeah, Corinne is 5.5 almost years old. And last night, Scott and I were talking about a series that had been shown on television about the World War II that the United States was in the European theater of action and also in the Pacific. And one of the things that we came up with, or which brought to my mind, and let me lay the groundwork here. My brother, Philip Scott, which was my son Scott's uncle, Corinne's great uncle, was a navigator on a B-24 in the Pacific
Which
Ocean.
was a bomber, an airplane.
And a B-24 bomber. They had what they call the bomb runs to retake the islands from the Japanese.
It was a big airplane with propellers on it. It
Oh
wasn't
yeah,
a jet.
it was not a jet. The B-24, the B-25, the B-27, and the B-29 were the bombers made by the United States for war purposes. We had to the nation had to get itself geared to prepare for war. We were not a warring nation. The country had just come through a depression, coming out of a depression, and on December the 7th, 1941, Japan attacked our island of Hawaii on Pearl Harbor. That's what put us into the war in the Pacific.
Now, we had already been in the war.
We were in the war in Europe at the same time, which at the time Germany and Italy, Hitler and Mussolini were the Axis, and the United States, Great Britain, and the other smaller nations were the Allies. And that's what divided the sections of the war. The Axis were out to take control of all of Europe, including England, which they attempted, and Hitler bombed. The people of London and this island of Great Britain went through terrible, terrible times. And we supplied those countries with food, also with boats and planes as fast as we could, because we were just helping material-wise help the Allies to protect themselves before we were brought into the war full force by December the 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked us. But back to my brother and Scott's uncle and Corinne's great uncle. He was a navigator on a B-24, which was a 4-engine big bomber. There were no jets at that time. There were very few directional and guidance instruments for the planes to fly by, and the navigator had to use the stars to guide them at night, of course. And
They must have had compasses too.
Well, they had compasses. Oh yes, of course. And then the navigator used the sextant on the stars at night to find where he was and where they were going. But their bomb runs were mostly made during the day. And if you would look at the map of the Pacific Ocean, I have to remember, the Pacific Ocean is the deepest of all the oceans, of the 5 big oceans. And it's one island after another. And the Japs over the years had taken control of these islands. And they were using them as bases to fly their planes from. And that's how they got to Hawaii. They didn't have the planes capable at that time to fly all the way from Japan to Hawaii. So they had to make stepping stones of the islands so they could reach our possessions. And of course they would have if they had taken Hawaii, they would have come on then to the western coast, and that was their plan. But back to this one episode that Scott and I were talking about. The war had been going on, and we had lost so many young men in taking these islands one at a time. Iwo Jima, oh my gosh, Leyte, Saigon, on the whole bunch over there, the Philippines. It was just,
Saipan, I think you meant. You said Saigon, but
oh, Saipan? Yeah,
Oh,
Saipan and Leyte, and which now is Formosa, and or vice versa, right off the top of my head, I'm not too sure. But anyway, they, we were to the point where we had to make the bomb runs to protect ourselves and to take back what the Japanese had taken from these islands. These people that were the natives of all these different islands were starving to death. The Japs came in there. It was terrible, and it was very, very bad. And this had been going on for several years, 41, 44, 45, about 1944, I guess, was when that bomb was dropped. But anyway, it got to the point where the United States had developed the atomic bomb. And it was a decision of the president, which at that time was Harry S. Truman, to decide whether to use the bomb.
why don't you go back before you get to that and talk about what Phil
Okay.
was doing, and then you can tell about how Phil was there.
Yeah, okay, very good. All right. Okay, Phil, as I said, was the navigator on this B-24. His plane they named the Dragon Lady, and they had this real cute girl painted on the nose of their plane. She was sitting on a suitcase and had all these little flags and stuff on the suitcase. And every crew that flew in one of those bombers named their plane. The Memphis Belle was another great big famous plane of group from the United States. And I believe they were in Europe. I've kind of forgotten, but I think they flew in the Europe operation. But anyway, back at our home back in Texas, Mother and Dad, of course, they just watched the news, listened to the news. We didn't have television at that time. Listened to the news and the radio, and every day when the mail came, Mother would go out to the mailbox to see if we'd heard from Phil. And then...
Because you didn't know where he was.
Oh, we had no idea where he was. We knew he was in the Pacific. We didn't not... And of course, communications at that time were very, very short and very, very... they were restricted.
There was no email, no cell phone.
No email. They did have a VE mail later, which was little bitty, about 3x5. Have you ever seen one of those?
Now, is that a telegram or what?
No, it was a mail, but they called it was like I've got one that Dr. Mayo Tenry sent Mother and Dad from Italy. I forgot about that. I'll have to show that to you sometime. But anyway, it came through the U.S. mail.
So something coming from the Pacific would take how long to come?
Oh, it would take a long time because
Like a week, 3 weeks?
Oh, it could take a month. It could take, because the only way any mail from our soldiers, Marines or whoever they were. Now the Navy ships, the Navy mail got through quicker because the Navy ships would get to a port where they could transfer their mail to another ship that was heading back to the States. But the soldier on the ground, his mail, it could take for several months to get back. And because it just had to go back, the mail was at least survival was what they were looking for, and to take one island back from the Japs. And it was, so mail was very erratic. And the officer didn't have to have his mail censored, but the officers in turn had to censor the enlisted men's mail to be sure they weren't giving out any facts of where they were or what was really going on. So we had not heard from Phil in a couple of months. And Mother and Dad were just, so anxious, so sad. It was very difficult times for everybody. They weren't the only ones. All people who had their sons in the war were in the same position.
Because they thought he might be dead.
Oh yeah, he could have been dead, and it would be end of the war maybe before they'd even know what had happened to him. But here came in the mail one time. Oh, and I was going to say, my dad, Phil's dad, would call Mother every day at lunchtime to be sure. He did. I don't think he ever missed a day. Did the mail come? Did we get any mail? And so finally, this one envelope came, and in it was one sheet of paper, and Phil had drawn the nose cone of their ship, had drawn the dragon lady sitting on the suitcase, and on that suitcase were all these little stickers, and it had names on those stickers. One of them I'll never forget because I had never heard of the island of Truk, T-R-U-K. T-R-U-K. So there was Truk, there was Lady, there was all names we'd never heard of. So my dad said, get the map, get the map. So we got the world map, got it out, and sure enough, we found the island, so we knew where he was flying from and over, where the bomb runs were taken care. And at that time, he was flying out of the island of Guam. We had taken Guam back. It was one of the largest islands there. Iwo Jima was not very large, but we lost so many men there because it was one cave after another, and the Japanese were so entrenched in those caves. It was difficult. But okay, so we had an idea at that time. Phil was still alive and what he was doing. All right, the war's going on. Now we get up to the time where
So tell them where you were living at the time before you go.
Okay.
You were on the farmhouse.
Yeah, I was still at home. My plans were that I was going to go and join the WWII, the women's organization that flew the planes from the factories to England, because we were supplying England with all these planes. Okay. That was my goal. That's what I was going to do, my effort for the war, to join up with and my mother and dad had a fit. They said, we've given our son, we don't want to give our daughter. Said, we just don't want you to do that. Well, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't leave him that way. And so I ended up staying at home, and I worked in the Consolidated Aircraft that was building these planes. They built the B-24, and then
And where was that located?
in Fort Worth, Texas. And I was living on the Scott place, which was south of Fort Worth at the time.
So did you have a car to drive to the
Oh
factory?
yeah, Dad and I had, Dad was working out there too. Matter of fact, my father was, Scott's grandfather, was with the company that built the Consolidated factory, plant. He did heavy equipment building, and he drove heavy equipment, and he would come home and he'd say, you cannot believe what we're building out there. This building is 2 miles long. It's going to be an assembly line, and they're going to make planes.
Is it still there?
Yeah, it's still there. I don't know what they produce, but it became Convair, but it was Consolidated originally. And and an assembly line to make a plane in a great big building was unheard of. You just couldn't imagine it. But anyway, then my dad, after the plant was built, and of course, the Texas winters at that time were a little colder than they are that we've been having lately. And Dad, of course, he had to dress warmly and all this bit to drive those heavy equipments, and he was good at it. But then he came in one day and he was telling Mother and myself that, he said they're wanting workers inside that plant. And he said, I think I'll sign up. And I said, well, Dad, what are you going to do? And he said, whatever they want me to do. But Dad was mechanically inclined anyway. So he ended up in the hydraulic department for the...
Now, at this time, was the farm also an income producer? Did you grow crops or have cattle or anything?
No, I'll tell you about that after we get get off this airplane bit. But at that time... So anyway, Dad ended up working on the assembly line, and as the years went by, I got a job out at Consolidated, and I went to what they called a quick snap introduction to engineering, that I drew plans, transposed airplane plans from one surface to another surface. And I was in the engineering department.
So I don't know, what was that for? You were just like copying drawings or?
Yeah, what you were doing, the plans for to build the plane would come through, and piece by piece, of course, and it just, you can imagine, one 3x5 section of a plane, outside of a plane, there'd be about 6 or 7 big sheets of drawings that had to be made. And what we did, we're given what we had to put on these sheets, and we would draw those on the sheets. Wherever rivet went, if you can believe it, every little rivet had a place on that where it had to be put. And when we got that, we would do that. We'd transpose all that on these particular sheets. Then they would go to a next stage. We were assembly line in that engineering department. And from the engineering department, it would go out to the assembly line. And then there'd be another process in there of transposing that on harder material. So, as they call and there was mostly, of course, there were so many women working that had never worked in their life because the men were gone. Somebody had to work in the factories, in the aircraft factories and the shipbuildings down in Houston, a big shipbuilding in Houston. But anyway, then the women mostly, well, they did everything, but one of the big things they did on these drawings that we would make in the engineering department, they'd transpose them onto the wing wherever they were working. I'll just use the wing because that's where I ended up working. And then what they called her Rosie the Riveter, she came along, she took that
paper or?
Well, yeah, she took the layout that where all these rivets should be. Well, before that, one person would come along, take that layout, and mark everywhere there was to be a rivet.
So it was the paper you were working on were like patterns. They were like a dress pattern. Like,
yeah, right.
So it was actually this actual size.
Actual size of the plane, and you just have about as I said, about maybe a 3x5 size paper, and just think how many it would take to build a wing, not the fuselage or anything like that. Okay, what I got tired working in that engineering department, and it was just so noisy in there you can't believe. I was next to the motors that were running all that stuff out there. And I told Dad one day, I said, I'm losing my hearing listening to all that. Well, I really wasn't, but I was just tired doing it. So I applied to go out on the assembly line, which I did, which I got. Here I am back to the layout sheets again. And I came along and I marked from the layout sheets, and with all your measurements, you had all your tools and everything. You'd measure, take the layout, measure, mark where that rivet went. Then you'd keep on going. Behind you came the lady with the rivets. And
were you up on top
I was on top of that plane, wing.
See, I've never heard this before. That's interesting.
Oh, shoot, I was out there for months.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And what kind of planes were you working on?
I was working on the B-52, which was the big new bomber.
Huh.
And, of course, the B-24 was already heavily in production. They had that thing. I have forgotten, and I think in this war series that we watched on television, it told how many planes, how long it took for a plane to be put together on that assembly line. You could hardly tell that assembly line, that plane was moving. Everybody had their one thing that they did, and just like Dad did the hydraulics, then he ended up as an inspector on the hydraulics. And Dad would come through. If he found a problem, man, that had to be redone again. That had to be done in a hurry.
Did you have to worry about falling off the airplane, or if you were...
Off the wing? Yeah, I had to worry about it. But you just get used to it. And I'd get up there on that wing by these great big ladders, big platform ladders, and go up there. But anyway, then Rosie the Riveter came along with her behind us, those of us that were marking where she was supposed to rivet. Then here we'd come. I mean, those ladies with their rivets came right along behind us, and all the time this plane's moving. It's very slowly. You just don't even realize the thing's moving. And of course, I was small, in size compared to some of those women. Some of those women were big women, and man, they could work as hard as any man ever did. But anyhow,
Did you get paid very much?
oh, got real good pay for those days. Of course, this country was just coming out of a depression, and I've got it written somewhere, but I made a good salary, and Dad did too. And but let me get back.
All right.
So I did this for a long time, and Dad stayed with the company until he retired, even after the war, and he enjoyed it. He was good at it, and of course everybody was working together. It was a great experience in this country. If anybody ever said, oh, this country would never come together, they couldn't do that. They're wrong. Wrong, wrong. When the chips were down, I'm telling you, everybody pulled together. It was survival, and we knew it was survival. So the one element that we had in common was nobody's going to take our country away from us. We're going to do what we can to help the boys who are on the front lines, pilots and Navy fellows, everybody. But now Scott asked what happened to the farm during those years. Well, very little was done for us or on our area because we didn't have that many acres involved. But Dad got real antsy one year, and he said to me, he said, "Sis, do you think we could put in a crop of grain this year?" And I said, told him, I said, "Well, Dad, if you want to, okay." He says, "It'll just be the two of us." And I said, "Well, we can try it." So I was working at night. Now wait, let me see, how'd that start out? No, we were both working the day shift at that time. So we'd go to the Consolidate. We left the house at 4 o'clock every morning. And we would work those shifts. Then we'd come home, and Dad and I, at night, we plowed the ground. We'd take turns. I'd plow with the tractor, and the disc plow to prepare the land to sow the seed. He would take turns. He'd go home, he'd go to the house, and he'd rest, or he'd sleep an hour or 2 hours. We did it in 2-hour shifts. And we, of course, had lights on the tractor. And Dad used to say, come daylight, whenever he'd have a chance, he said, "Sis, I have to go back and plow out your corners. You didn't make very good corners with that tractor and plow." But we got the ground plowed. Then we continued working at night and the weekends, and we sowed the grain.
What were you planting?
Well, at that time we were planting wheat because that's what was needed the most for food service. And also, we debated wheat or oats for cattle. But by this time, Dad had gotten rid of most of the cattle. We just had, well, let's see, we had a cow. We had one cow that Dad milked to have milk on the farm. Did we have two? One, I'm sure of. But anyway.
So the farm, even before the war years, was not really a main source of income for the
No.
It was just really a place to live while he had a full-time job somewhere else.
Oh yeah, and Phil and Dad, they planted grain stuff for the horses and cows every year, but that was easy to do. Mm-hmm. You know, you could plow the ground and sow whatever you were planting, and sorghum or whatever you were going to be feed stuff for the cattle, because you had to. It was much cheaper than doing your own, having to go and buy it.
And how big was the property that you had at that time?
Well, we had, let's see, 200 and some odd acres. Not all of it was cultivated. But let me get back to the crop that Dad and I put in.
All right, go ahead.
Okay.
You're talking about the grain thing.
Oh yeah, planting. But during the war, we were not in production in big deal. It was just for feed stuff or for on this. Dad was determined he was going to try this wheat, winter wheat planting. Okay, we got it in, and the rains came and all this bit, and it came up real nice. And then we had it. Well, matter of fact, it was just beginning to come surface, little sprouts coming up. And then we had the coldest winter that we had had in ages. And we had snow. Oh my gosh, it was just snowing like crazy. And Dad said, one night we were eating dinner, and he said, shook his head, and he said, there goes our wheat crop. I said, well, now let's don't give up. Let's just wait and see what happens. So the next day I thought, by jingo, I'm going to go up there at that field and see if there's any sign of anything surviving the snow. So
Yeah, I would think snow really would not
yeah, but see,
be
it was
so bad.
well, but we had the freeze first, see, and then
I
the
see.
snow came on. If we'd had the snow first,
Uh-huh.
and then it was just ice. That field was so, I'll never forget. This field was so crunchy, gosh. So I got the horse, wasn't Snip, I don't even remember the name of the horse's name. But anyway, and the dog, and I rode up there to the field, got down, and as I rode, walked through the field, everything was, I just didn't see anything that looked like it was going to survive that crop. I thought, well, maybe Dad's right. So I got off the horse and got down on my knees, and I scratched down through the bottom in a row, and way down underneath all that layer of ice and the snow on top were little green sprouts coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I tell you, I could hardly wait to get back to the house to tell Dad. And I said, Dad, it's not wilted, it's gonna be okay. We're gonna have a crop. And we did. But that was just in Dad's mind, his effort to do something more for the war.
So after the grain grew up, you
Then we
harvested it and sold it to somebody. Who'd you sell it to?
Well, honey, I don't remember. Dad would sell it.
An elevator somewhere?
Yeah, we put it in, of course, in the barn down there, we had those 2 big bins.
Uh-huh.
And after it was harvested, let's see, the Mitchell, Earl and Horace Mitchell were the brothers. One lived on one side of us, and Earl was up on the other side. Horace was on one side, Earl was on the other. And they had a crew that came through. Now they did a lot of acres planting.
Did they have combines back then?
Oh yeah, and they had their own combine crew, and they came and did what we had. But anyway, Dad, we got that through, and it was just it was a time that people in today's world and generations today, just you cannot understand how everything was rationed.
How did that work?
Well, it worked fine. everybody accepted it. You had to accept it. You didn't have a choice.
Was it a state program or?
Oh, it was national.
But what I
Every
mean
state
was-
had their own.
That's what I was saying. Who gave
Yeah.
you the ration coupon?
Well, yeah, it was issued by every state issued their own ration books, but it was the same. They were all the same. But
So what sort of things were
okay,
rationed?
we were allowed 2 pairs of shoes a year, so we had coupons for shoes. We had meat was rationed. Now the things that were not rationed were that I remember because I picked up a lot of them as I'd come home from work. I'd stop by a Safeway and pick up a box of detergent and salt and kind of some staples that were not. Now sugar was rationed, flour was not rationed. Canned goods, beans, corn, anything like that, you had coupons. You were allowed. I don't remember what the allotment was, but you couldn't buy those any kind of canned goods without your ration book.
So did you guys keep a garden going?
Oh yeah, and of course we were fortunate. We had a garden. Mother and Daddy kept. I didn't do anything with the garden, but Mother and Dad kept the garden going. So so we had our own, a lot of our own food, all of our fresh fruit and stuff, fresh vegetables, and of course we had chickens, so we had eggs and had the cow. So we basically, food-wise, we were okay. But you know, we take for granted a can of pineapple, a can of applesauce, you know, all this bit, nothing.
Now, did you use the cow for milk, or
Yeah.
So you milked the cow?
Oh yeah, my
and you
dad.
guys drank the milk.
Yeah, we drank and made butter. Mother made her own butter out of
So
the
it
milk.
wasn't pasteurized or.
No way.
You just milked the cow and.
Milk the cow, put it in the bucket, take it to the house, put it in the refrigerator, and then if Mother wanted to do butter, make some butter, needed butter, she'd churn it.
Wow.
And you know, it's just the way it was done, period. And
That's called raw milk today.
that's raw milk today, and oh Lord, you'd die dead if you drank it. You know, it just, oh, horrors. You just can't drink that milk unless it's pasteurized, homogenized, or whatever they want to do to it. But we got it straight from the source, and it was good. Cream, there'd be some cream on it sometimes. Ooh, it was good. But anyway, so the home life was very restricted, and gasoline, of course, was very, very limited. Now, because we put in, had the tractor and we put in a crop, we were allowed extra gas coupons. Now, and we also had, we got extra coupons because we worked for a defense plant. Dad and I both got them.
Was there a black market in those coupons?
No. Nobody had time for a black market. Didn't want a black. They'd just shot you if you'd come up with a black market coupon. People were very
But I would think there would be some people who didn't need a pair of shoes, so they would sell their shoe coupon to somebody else.
or if you could give it to somebody, or you could sell. Yeah, I guess you could sell it, but nobody ever thought about selling the coupon that I ever heard of. Anybody selling it? They'd swap it. They'd swap. I don't need a pair of shoes, but I could sure use some sugar coupons. Now it was interesting. My mother, your grandmother, Corinne's great grandmother, loved fudge. Candy, fudge candy. Oh, and she made the best fudge you could taste.
I remember it.
Yeah, so Aunt Uta and Aunt Marie and even Aunt Mabel, they, every once in a while, if they would come over, they would bring Mother a sack of sugar. They would use one of their sugar coupons and get a 5-pound pack of sugar and bring it to Mother. Oh, that was, then of course she'd real quick make some fudge for them. That was just something special. But let me see. Oh, anything made of leather, you didn't have. Tires were rationed, and that's where we first heard of retreads. They would take a tire that had a blowout, and they would retread that thing. Heat rubber on top, old rubber on top of a blown out tire. Well, you didn't want to get that tire too hot by going too fast, because it'd throw that retread off.
Right.
It'd get real hot and melt to that whatever it was glued on with, and zap, it'd be gone.
Now, were they? Did you guys can food off your garden? Or?
Well, yes, but the canning came through the Depression years.
Which was before the war?
Well, it was before the war. This was in the 30s. Now, we had my Mittie Hudson Scott, my grandmother, spent her life after my grandfather died, living from our house to her son and 3 daughters. She spent time with everybody all the time.
Oh, I see.
Summertime she came with us because the winters were too cold for her at the farm. And Aunt Uta and Aunt Mabel here in Dallas had warm homes, as warm as it could be. They had, each room had a heater, a gas heater. And so in the wintertime she stayed with them, but we got her for the summertime. But there was always the canning season, and yes, we can tomatoes, we can corn, we can beans, and we do it all, and then after they get so many cans done, they divide it, so many to each family. Now, Aunt Uta and Uncle Jim was just the two of them, but they'd take so many because grandmother was with them, and the same way with Aunt Uta. Aunt Marie was single at the time, so she didn't want that much, and we kept 3/4 of it, I would say, or at least half of it at the farm. But if anybody ever ran out, there was always, they'd come over and say, "Hey, do you have some? Well, I'm out of corn. Do you have any corn?" Well, we always had extras, so they would divide. That is no big deal. And Dad had bees. We had honeybees, and so but by the time the war came, we didn't have bees. He had sold them all. But over the years with the bees, and we'd have honeycombs and have honey. Ooh, that's just the best sugar you can make.
Now, where was the garden?
The garden was just west of the house. You know where the garage was? Okay, the garden was on the other side of that fence where y'all used to ride Snip all the way through.
We used to ride Trixie, not Snip.
Trixie, that's right. Snip was earlier.
On the far side of the fence. So out in the pasture.
In the pasture there. That's right. And the garden was just west of the house. Big garden. Now, one year Dad had another garden. They had two going. One was up by the hedgerow up there behind the barn. Mother didn't like that because the beehives were up there too, and the bees would see Mother come in and they'd say, "Hey, here she comes," and zoop, she would always get stung up there. So she'd go up all covered up.
Well, I didn't like her taking her.
No, they just didn't like any activity around their beehives.
Oh, I see.
So Dad kind of cut that one out, and then they had the one there west of the house.
Now, did you have to fence off the garden from animals, or?
Yeah, well, only ones we had were the cows, and we had a couple of cows, and we had some calves too. But anyway, they were in the pasture back of the barn, up by the two creeks that ran down through there. And only ones that were out in that pasture, where the garden was, were the horses. We put them out there.
And then you had a hen house too?
Had a hen house with chickens and eggs. And
where was the hen
fried
house?
Chicken. It was
next to the barn? I don't remember.
No, the hen house was gone by the time you came along. But where the garage, you'd come down the driveway and turn into the garage. The chicken houses before you got to the barn, about where the pump house was, when they drilled a new water well.
It was on the right of the driveway or the left of the driveway?
The left of the driveway, on the same side as the house, but it was back towards the barn. Big chicken house, and you'd have to go gather the eggs every afternoon, and of course feed the chickens and be sure there was water.
And did you have
a lot of
coyotes try to get in there, or?
Yeah. Once in a while, we'd hear them at night. Hear those chickens go, tick, 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 cluck, 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 cluck. Something was in the chicken house. Either it was a skunk or a coyote or something had made its way in. But the chickens would go in and go to roost, and Dad would go and close the door to the chicken house. And of course, then the fence was fenced off for them where they would be. And the guineas roosted on top of the barn. You didn't ever put a guinea in a chicken house. They wouldn't stay. They still had too much wildness in them. And we'd have to watch them when they'd go off when they were laying eggs and find their nest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they'd go off. They wouldn't lay an egg in a chicken house for anything.
Well, why would you bother with that kind of chicken then?
Because Dad liked them. Because that guinea was the best watchdog you could ever have. Anything at night that came down that driveway, anything walking around that barn, any movement anywhere, those guineas would go crazy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There were two of them that would roost on the house. Well, when this is before the war, but when I was dating, well, it was through the war too, I guess. And I'd come in at night, and the minute that car, my date's car would turn down that driveway, we could hear those damn guineas. And I remember Leonard Moreland said, "One of these days, I'm coming out here with a gun, and I'm gonna kill those two suckers on top of that house, so it can be quiet." Oh gosh, they were something else. But anyway.
So anyway, back to Phil. So he.
Okay, we're back. Let's get back to what Scott and I were talking about the war. Phil's in the Pacific, flying the B-24, Navigator. They're making their bomb runs out of Guam, and he was. They flew off of another island before they ended up at Guam, but Guam was the bigger island and closer to the stair-stepping islands that they were bombing. But the day, let me back up. The decision was up to Harry S. Truman, President of the United States, as to whether to use the atomic bomb or not. And he was I'll have to say, Harry was an unusual gentleman. He was down to earth. He was, had a stubborn streak. He was very conscientious of people. Now, Harry had his faults, as everybody does, but he was very aware of the number of young men that we were losing, both in Europe and in the Pacific, and it troubled him greatly. Now, he and Bess just had the one daughter. I don't even remember her name, but anyway, it came down to him, okay, is he going to will the United States use that atomic bomb against Japan? Or will we just have to continue to lose all of our men one island at a time? It was getting to the point, it was just unbelievable, the number of soldiers and sailors and Marines that we lost in taking these islands. And
so the decision had to do with not just using the atom bomb, but dropping it on a civilian population.
That's right. As to what would make
surrender.
the Japanese surrender. And the only thing that they could figure out was to show them that they'd either surrender or they'd lose their country completely. So, okay, he made the decision. We will use the atomic bomb. So that's where the Enola Gay came in. That was the name of the ship that carried the atomic bomb.
Yeah. It was an airplane.
Yeah, it was an airplane, and and the name of that airplane was the Enola Gay, which was the name of the mother of the pilot who flew the plane.
Do you know which kind of airplane it was?
Yeah, it was a B.
It was just a specially fitted bomber, maybe.
Well, they just took a bomber. Isn't that strange? I can't remember which one it was. But they just took a bomber and modified it to carry the atomic bomb. And it was, let's see, I want to say a B.
Well, it doesn't matter.
I should remember that. I just don't remember. But anyway, so, of course, this was all secret. Nobody knew anything about this, that this was going to happen. And there was a movie made with Robert Taylor as the pilot of the Enola Gay, and it was talking about showing how the preparation of that flight. But anyway, so Phil and his group, they're flying now still, making their bomb runs every day. And they his squadron and the other squadrons that were stationed on bomb all had their orders on one day. They were all to make bomb runs at the same time on different islands, but at the same time. The whole fleet, you wouldn't say fleet for boats, but the whole squadrons of airplanes were in the air just about at the same time. And Phil said they all kind of said, boy, you really are making a push for all of us going and making our bomb runs on the same day. And so they made their run, and Phil said they had unloaded all their bombs. They were making a turn to go back to their base. And as he said, as they turned here, up came in their vision the explosion from the atomic bomb, the big mushroom, and the huge light. And Phil said they all knew immediately the atomic bomb. We've dropped the bomb. But where? They knew it was in Japan, but they didn't know where. And then they went back, got back to their base.
And they tell them why they were all up in the air.
Oh yeah, okay. All these squadron of planes had been deployed on bomb runs for the Japanese to see, oh hey, we've got to.
It was to deflect interest.
It was to deflect the Japanese, keep their interest on all these planes making
so
bomb runs.
So they would know which one was.
So they wouldn't be able to pinpoint the Enola Gay that was carrying the atomic bomb. Of course, they didn't know we were carrying. They were going to get hit, but the output was a decoy, really. So when they get back, Phil and them get back to the island, then they learned that the atomic bomb had been dropped. And then that was, they dropped 2, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, yeah. And then that brought the Japanese to their knees, and then they had to surrender. They didn't have a choice.
Actually, I read somewhere that whoever made the decision to surrender, it was a vote of a handful of warlords or generals or whatever, and even then, not all of them voted to surrender.
That's right. Some of them, they'd go down, they'd let their as far as they were concerned, that was a dishonor to surrender, and they would just have to let them blow their country off the map. They did not want to surrender.
Of course, they didn't know that there were only 2 atom bombs, I believe.
Well,
there were only the 2.
We only had 2 prepared, ready to go.
But the Japanese didn't know that.
No, so then that one dropped, and then the next one dropped, and oh my goodness, the people, when the news came that we had dropped the bombs and all this, we had hope that the Pacific War would soon be over. Oh my goodness, it was, you just don't know, it was just such a terrific feeling that there would be an end to this.
Do you remember how the reporting was done at that time? Did they did they talk about the civilian casualties in those cities or anything, or did they? No,
it was, you knew it. There was pictures, that came through on the newspaper, and then if you went to a movie, they always had the newsreel, which showed some of the latest pictures taken, which would be months old by then, at least a month old.
This still was before television, right?
Oh yeah, television was just, it was just, nobody talked about it. Nobody knew too much about it, didn't care about it, didn't realize what it was. So we listened to Edward R. Murrow from London doing all the bombing of London every night. You could hear him, and it would be, you could hear the bombs behind him and all this bit. It was that the radio was all, and the radio waves were all that we had.
And newspapers.
And the newspapers, which would come through too. But at the same time, that was, then after the surrender, and the surrender was on the ship, the Missouri, I believe.
I don't know.
I think the surrender was signed on the ship named the Missouri. I could be wrong, but I believe that's what it was. But anyway, then, okay, the Japanese had a lot, I don't know how many thousands of our prisoners, of our men as prisoners. And they usually killed them. They didn't want to and they didn't feed them very much. They starved them to death as much as, they'd rather shoot them on the battlefield than to take them as prisoners. But at the same time, they still had a lot of our prisoners. Okay, so now the bombers are sitting over there. They're not making their bomb runs anymore to Japan or the islands held by the Japanese. So what they do, disassemble all those bomb racks in that bomb bay and those airplanes and put hospital litters, line them up in there. And I feel they described it one time. I think they had like maybe there'd be a level of four bunks, hospital bunks, that would run the whole length of that Bombay area, which was most of the airplane, the middle of the airplane. And they'd go in and get the prisoners, our men who were prisoners, put them on the plane, fly them to one island, get them on a ship, a medical ship, and then get them eventually back to the United States hospital. And that was the work of the bombers at that time, to get our men off.
And I guess the bombers themselves couldn't fly all the way back to the U.S.
Oh no, they didn't have that length capacity
range, yeah.
to fly the length. Oh, of course now, the ships can with the jets, but they didn't. See, they just had to be as that was the one reason we needed the stepping stone islands, because our ships couldn't. They could make a bomb run real far, but getting back to their original base, as Phil said, there was times when they would get back to Guam that they were so short on gasoline that the plane, after they landed and was taxiing down the air landing strip, would run out of gas and the plane would just stop.
Wow.
You know, and that was the work of the navigator, to make that gas last, to get back. And if they and the one reason we lost a lot of planes after their bomb runs, if they hit a storm, and the Pacific has the wind currents are very, they're not just normal wind blowings. They'll have all kinds of wind, and they blow these big bombers that have unloaded, and they're lighter than they were to start with, would blow them off course, and by the time they get back on course to get back to their base, they've used up a lot of gas that was used for them to get back to their home base. And we lost a lot of bombers that way. They'd go right into the Pacific, because they couldn't get to an island. So that was the value of taking the islands back for our bomb runs, where we'd have a place for our bombs to fly out, our ships to fly out of. But anyway, and I was telling Scott about one crew squadron and a crew that flew most all the Phil's crew and plane, and this other crew and another plane almost always made the same bomb runs. So they kind of, if you're flying with the same group all the time, you are a little more knowledgeable of each one that's in the flight. The bombardier works with the bombardier, and the navigator with the navigator, and they, keep up. Well, what'd you do over that island? And boy, wasn't that wind something? And different things like that. So Phil and this other ship, those two ships had picked up as many prisoners as they could get in. Now, if the prisoner was still able to sit, they could still sit them in there, but the litters for the ones that couldn't walk, were starved out, mainly, as Phil said. They were in bad shape. But anyway, they'd get as many as they could on a plane to get them out of Japan. And both planes had their load of the prisoners that they were bringing back, and they hit, Phil called it a typhoon. And fortunately, Phil's ship, they get blown off course, and they're Wally, and I can't think of his last name, was Phil's pilot, and they were seeing their way through the typhoon, and all at once, just Phil said he looked up, and the navigator in that B-24 sits higher than the pilot, because he has to look out the top. And Phil said he looked up and he saw the top of this mountain. And Wally, the pilot, saw it too. And he gunned that plane, put more power to it, and they got over the mountain. The plane behind them didn't. It flew straight into the mountain. So there went all the people, the crew and the prisoners that they had liberated and were taking home were lost in that plane crash. And Phil said, well, the only thing they could think of, a consolation of losing all those prisoners after all they had been through, was that they didn't die at the hand of the enemy. They died with their own people in an effort of getting home.